Welcome, members and guests, to Ulster County Women's Network's 13th Zoom event. I'm Leslie Snow, president of UCWN, and we're pleased to have with us today Randy Hobler. Welcome, Randy, and thank you everyone for attending. Before we begin, let's acknowledge our grief for the more than 575,000 people who have died in the US alone, and the millions of others, including ourselves, who have suffered from this pandemic. Please acknowledge their absence with silence together for a short time. Thank you. Let me introduce our advisory committee. Judy Kerman should be handling the Zoom. Thank you. And Kristen Winger, our coordinator. If you can't see her, let's see.
I'll go back to gallery.
Okay.
This is Kristen.
There's Kristen. I saw a hand wave. Sheila Gould. Sheila. And Arlene Gould, no relation. Arlene's our secretary. Sheila's our community outreach, community relations. And I'm sorry, I can't remember that title. It's so long. And who else? Gloria. She's not quite here yet. Gloria Wasselin. So thank you all of my fabulous group for taking the time and effort to help put these things together. Everybody depends on you. I know I do. And if anyone is looking for a creative avenue working in service, this is a fabulous, effective team. And just let me know that you have some time. Let's welcome the members of the Women's Club of Forest Hills. We have Angela Bernardino, guest of Susan Metzger. And who else is here? There's Paul and Joshua Gerwitz. I don't see them on the video, but they're here. Hello. And we have our new member, Lisa Gradell. There she is. Welcome very much. Hope to see you again. Susan Metzger is our dynamic duo this month.
I've gained weight from the pandemic, and I'm actually two of us.
Dynamic uno.
Uno, right.
Sorry. Susan, please do the honors of introducing Randy.
Sure. Thank you very much. I'm very happy to introduce my friend of over 25 years, who I know through my friend and his soulmate, Alexa Smith. Hi, Alexa, but I don't think she's out there. Randy is like Zelig, the eponymous character from the Woody Allen movie, in that he has intersected with many notable people, including C. Everett Koop, his pediatrician, George W. Bush, high school classmate and fellow band member, but it was Randy's band, Don Rumsfeld, college advisor, Albert Einstein neighbor. He's also experienced parts of history firsthand, such as the Libyan revolution sparked by Gaddafi in 1969. And he knew the name Benghazi scores of years before the rest of us, or many of the rest of us. So when Randy is involved, things get consequential. Randy is a polymath, having written a musical based on Meredith Willson. He knew Meredith Willson, and published an article on the non-existence of time. Okay. In terms of his business life, Randy has worked as an international marketing consultant in Brazil, France, Belgium, Greece, Saudi Arabia, Dubai, Indonesia, China, Thailand, and Malaysia, and lived and worked in Saudi Arabia for 2 years. He's also a really good storyteller. So without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Randy.
Thank you, Susan, so much. Also, thank you to Judy, Leslie, and Kristen for being so gracious as to have me. I heard you guys talking about Svetlana Stalin. I believe she lived in Princeton, about a mile from me.
Tell me, do you knew her?
I didn't know her, but we saw her walking around town. So anyway, before we start, I thought I'd refer back to this band that I was in at Andover 57 years ago and show you a picture on the screen, because we feel that we got the original idea for Zooms, and we should get some sort of royalties or something. And it says the host has disabled the screen sharing. So if you can, whoever the host is can undo that, I can show this to you.
You got it.
Okay, let's try again. Okay, so here we go. So this is the cover of our album from 1964. And that's me, and second from left, second from the right on the left. So we came up with this notion of Zoom. Anyway, I have a standard pitch that I have, but Susan wanted me to customize it to this group. So it will be customized more to what you guys are interested in, according to Susan. So let's dive into this. And they also want me to go full screen. So we're going to go to slideshow from the beginning. Does that look big to everybody?
Yes.
Great. Okay. So the name of the book I wrote is 101 Arabian Tales, How We All Persevered in Peace Corps Libya. And it's also what Susan wanted to know is how I persevered in writing the book. All right. And so there's a lot to say there, but I just want to focus on a coincidence. In my book, I say, I fancy myself as some sort of prince of coincidence, a kind of smarty pants of happenstance, a long odds fellow. We're talking hard numbers, non-causal, for example, independent relationships between events, the simultaneity of multiple events, each with highly remote odds. So this coincidence starts with my very book. And there was this convergence. 48 years after I was in the Peace Corps, all of a sudden, all these things happened within like weeks of one another. So the first thing that happens is in September of 2016, I came across a book called Volunteers of America, The Journey of a Peace Corps Teacher, and it's by Dennis Carlson, and he had been in Libya. And so I read his book and I said, wow, I can do a better book than that. Then on September 24th, 2016, my sister, who lives in Santa Barbara, sees this article in the Santa Barbara Sentinel about Gaddafi's rise and my Libyan Little League fall by a journalist named Jeff Wing. Jeff Wing. It was all about, he was in Libya at the same time I was, and he was an army brat. So I read that story, got to know him. Then in October of 2016, can anybody recognize this set of books?
It's not Harvard Classics, is it? No.
Those are called the Great Books. And my grandfather willed these to me, and they're all the great books in history, right? You know, Socrates and Herodotus and Gibbon and all these kinds of things. All the things we're supposed to have read. So they look so beautiful on his shelf. I said, "Oh, Grandpa, can you will those to me?" He said, "Fine." So these sat on my shelf for 48 years, and I never had read anything there. And I started feeling guilty. I mean, increasingly guilty, because I went by this on my shelf every day. And so I said, okay, I'll just read Herodotus. So I read all of Herodotus, and I noticed, and this is in November 2016, at the same time as all this Libyan stuff started, that the world, according to Herodotus, you'll notice in the lower left-hand corner, it says Libya. And in Herodotus, he says Libya is surrounded on four sides by water. And I said, how can that be? And I looked at this map and said, aha, Libya was the name for all of Africa. So I looked into Africa itself because I love researching origins of things. And the ICA is a suffix meaning place, like Attica or Balearica, right? And the AFR comes from Yifrin. And Yifrin, if you look on the lower side, is the name of a little town that was literally 1.5 miles from my little village of El Gala. And on the right, you can see where that is with a little thing from Google Maps, about 85 miles south of Tripoli. So that was another coincidence, but there's more. This is a shot of me giving a an international class at Fairleigh Dickinson University on December 23rd, 2016. What was I doing there? After 48 years, the Peace Corps had told me from the get-go, oh, sometime you've got to go teach a class. And I said, okay. And for 48 years, nothing happened. And then suddenly in December of 2016, they said, oh, why don't you go give a class? So I gave this class at Fairleigh Dickinson University on December 23rd, 2016. And in the middle of all this, I decided to have my first interview of the 101 interviews I conducted with a guy named Angus Todd. And we went to this restaurant in New York where the owner of it was this Algerian who spoke Berber and Arabic and French and English, all my languages. And, we were talking and I was taking notes and all this kind of stuff. And here's a picture of the two of us, on December 27th, 2016. And at the end of our little meal, I said, oh, by the way, Angus, where'd you go to college? And he said, Fairleigh Dickinson. So what are the chances of all that? Anyway, this book is the story of 3 Libyan contingents: Libya 1 from 1966 to 1968, Libya 2, 1968 to 1969, which is my group, and Libya 3, which says 1969, 1969. So the sharp-eyed amongst you might say, wait, what's going on there? What happened was they trained all summer in 69. And then on September 1st, Gaddafi took over and that was that. And they all went to the other countries all over the world. The geography, you can see Princeton, New Jersey, my hometown, Clearfield, Utah, where I trained, Salt Lake City, where some training happened, and also in Bisbee. The time span of the book is from the training to in-country, to the revolution, and then, most valuably, to 50-year epilogues and what all these people did, some of them amazing stories of what they did. In fact, this guy here flew to Cairo 200 times. He flew for TWA, and you know that thing when people say, put down your seatbelts, it's time to land, put down your trays and all that kind of stuff. He has a spiel that's 5 minutes long in fluent Arabic, and he says it off. It's my own story, woven together with in-depth interviews, as I said, of 101 of my fellow volunteers. It's encompassed by the story arc of my father losing his best buddy in World War II, a casualty of war, to my losing my best buddy due to Libya, a casualty of peace. So here's a map of where we all ended up. I had to hire a cartographer to do this. And you'll notice there's a big bunch of us up near Tripoli in the northwest corner of Libya, a bunch of us over in the northeast corner of Libya in Benghazi, and a scattering of us down in some oases in the Sahara Desert. The rest of it, there's not much there because there's not much there. It's just desert and hardly anything grows there. So that's why it's all bunched up. So what I'd like to do, because when you read about books or you read about movies or TV shows or anything, it's really boring just to hearing the description, but what's really interesting is the actual stories themselves. So I'm going to read you some excerpts from a chapter, and this is because this was something that would be appropriate for a women's group, as Susan indicated, and it's called Gripes, Gropes, and Grabs. This isn't the whole chapter, but just some excerpts. So now I will start. The social constrictions on American women were oppressive, as Jean Morey recently shared with me, contrasting my male recollection of Benghazi with that of her American women friends. She said, "We never saw the beautiful city with your eyes. We couldn't walk the lovely El Nasser Street Corniche. We couldn't go to the movies. We couldn't walk the streets to see the camel or sheep markets or speak with the merchants. We couldn't interact with our students or their families. To visit a woman, one of her young brothers or sisters would have to walk with us to their house and back. It makes me sad to realize how much I missed of Libya because of my gender." One female volunteer underlined that buses were particularly dangerous places to be. "I was literally thrown off a bus in Benghazi, skinning my hands and knees as I landed, with school books flying in all directions." On another occasion, having just disembarked from the bus at the square near the cathedral in Tripoli, Maggie Boissois noticed a Libyan man whom she concluded was following her, because when she switched sides of the streets, he did likewise. That afternoon, she was hot, tired, and crabby. The man bumped into her. Her usual response would be to grumble and walk away. But this time she saw red, and she yelled in Arabic, "You pig!" She was appalled in spite of herself. She kept moving away, thinking the guy would keep following her. But the guy was so shocked, he stood stock still in the middle of the road, slack-jawed with honking traffic flowing around him. Nancy Corrin's introduction to Libya's harassment culture did not go well. Since she was teaching in Misurata in an all-boys school and the faculty was all male, they didn't know what to do with her. So between classes, she was holed up in a tiny closet stuffed with mops, brooms, and buckets. She was never offered any tea the whole year. In Homs, Rebecca Peterson walked daily about a half-mile across a wadi to her girls' school. This took her past a boys' boarding school. All was well until one day a clutch of boys spotted her. They started shouting obscenities. They started to throw rocks and closed in around her in a circle. Her adrenaline kicked in. She decided to address the biggest of the boys and shouted in perfect Arabic, "Haram alik," meaning shame upon you. You have brought shame upon your mother. You have brought shame upon your sisters. You have brought shame upon your grandmother. The boys were taken aback, shocked that this woman spoke Arabic. They couldn't deal, thinking she was some kind of witch. They ran away. Things were, of course, much worse for Libyan women. Women not only had to ride in the rear bus, they had to sit on the floor. Libyan women were not allowed to drive cars or even bicycles. Lorraine Slaviak, in addition to her teaching duties, volunteered at the Benghazi hospital, where they would periodically treat women wives for burns. The cause was always the same. These wives, these wives would prepare meals for their families over charcoal stoves that, rather than being waist high on a counter, were on the floor, which entailed much bending over. Husbands would get upset that a meal wasn't ready on time and would summarily kick over the charcoal stove, sending hot coals flying in all directions, and inevitably the wives' clothes would catch fire. So another question that everybody wants to know is, how did I find 400 people, of whom I interviewed 101, 50 years later? Obviously not without the internet, without email, or without Excel. And the starting point was training site biographies. And I was able to find 4 of them besides the one I had. The one on the left is the one of mine on the cover. The one on the right is the one from 1966. And here are a couple of the other ones. Now, what's inside these training profiles is hugely useful for finding people. On the inside, they have pictures of everybody. They have their first names. And sometimes there's a middle initial, which is very helpful if you have a common name like John Jones and you want to find out what the middle initial is. It also has their date of birth. And if you have Ancestry.com, that's a very helpful thing. It also includes their college. And I found that alumni associations at colleges are hugely useful, and they will, on your behalf, email to the alumni if they want to be contacted or not, and usually they do. And then also their hometown is indicated, and even though it's 50 years old, sometimes if you know where those people were, that helps. By the way, this guy at the bottom, Stuart McGee, is the most colorful guy in our group. When, after the revolution, instead of going home, he went to Mallorca, immediately started a restaurant, and he's still there at the same restaurant. So my detective work includes sources like asking each person, hey, okay, I'm talking to you, but who else do you know, who was in the Peace Corps with you? As I mentioned, the alumni associations, Google, of course, Ancestry, I mentioned, newspapers, and then obituaries. This is very, even if you're not writing a book, if you're just trying to find a parent or find an old friend or something like that, the trick is to find the parent of the friend, the mother or the father, then find the obituary of the parent, and then at the bottom of the obituary, it'll say, oh, surviving are X, Y, and Z, and it'll have the name and usually even the town where these people live. And then the most powerful site I found, and again, this is something you can use for personal or business use, and it's free, is advancedbackgroundchecks.com. And I've used this, I use this every day. And what it looks like is it allows you to put 3 things in the lines here in the field. So, for example, I've just put in arbitrarily John Jones, Arizona, and importantly, the age of the person, because that really is going to narrow this thing down. So here's what immediately came up: John Coy Jones, age 73. There's his address, and there are his phone numbers. Usually, the most recent phone number is the one that's correct. Also, you double check on spouse names and locations when you're working with this, advancedbackgroundchecks.com. And of course, you follow up with phone calls and emails. So Excel helped me, and I'm very glad that I was forced to learn Excel about 20 years ago. And of course, we use it more for text than we do for calculations because you can alphabetize and so forth. So this is what my spreadsheet looks like. It's about, as I say, 400 in people, but I've got the name, the address, the phone number, email, and all this sort of contact information that I keep on people and what they did and so forth. And then after interviewing these folks, these 101 folks, some of them in person, most of them by phone, I would solicit photographs, diaries, and letters. I'd seek out my villagers. And also, I wanted to make this book broader than just this one story. So there's a lot of history in here relevant to Libya events and people, and had to go to hundreds of sources for that. Here's an example, just a small example of my bibliography, just showing you, all the kinds of places I had to go to find the right information. I also read 43 Peace Corps volunteer books to get the right perspective on the Peace Corps, and read a lot of other books, as I said, and researched the history. And the challenge of this book was, what do you call all this when you've got 101 people? And I finally figured out it's called a collective memoir. The next question is, how do you organize all this? And it took a while, but if you're familiar with the nonfiction expert and Pulitzer Prize winner, John McPhee, he's written books about this, and he says, structure, structure, structure. So from this, I kind of derived, by a lot of trial and error, what the principles might be for a collective memoir. And the principles meaning ways of making it, good and easy for people to read. One is a narrative flow coherence within chapters, but also from chapter to chapter. Making sure everything you've got there is relevant, even though there might be something that's interesting but not relevant. Then I had collective chapters on critters, maladies, victuals, ruminations, and the women's issues is one of the ones I mentioned to you that have no chronology associated with them. And then, and I'll give you an example of this, structure within structure. In other words, what's the structure of all this material for a given chapter? Is it from small to large, the least important to most important, whatever, and even substructuring under that. And then I also did space breaks between my story and others, so that as the reader's going along, they can know when they're switching from my story to someone else's. So I thought I'd show you guys visually an example of a chapter I've called Critters. And there are all these funny stories, for 40 pages worth of funny stories about, and compelling stories about the different kinds of critters in Libya, from the smallest to the largest is the principle I use. So we start with sandflies in the upper left corner, and these things were invisible. They could get through screens easily. They bit me so often, my forearms were literally covered with these things, and I had to scratch them all the time. They were so itchy. Then you go up to ants and giant fleas and flies and spiders and black beetles. There's a story about dung beetles I've got where there was this guy on a motorcycle, one of our teachers, he was on his way to school. He saw this dung beetle rolling this thing, which was enormously heavier than he was. And he just stared mesmerized by it for half an hour and was late to school. Cockroaches, amazing stories. One wag amongst us said there were 2 seasons in Libya, cockroaches and no cockroaches. So on it goes. You can see how the animals get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And then there's camel stories, and many of them, but one of them is there's this couple in Benghazi, and they were new, and they heard this roaring outside one morning, and it sounded like lions. They were frightened to death, and they opened the window, and there were all these, it was a camel market that was right outside their window, and it turns out they were female camels in heat. Also, I tried to make this book palatable, so there are no footnotes in it. It's whimsical, conversational, and entertaining. As I said, I've included interesting details that are universal, like Alexander the Great, Churchill, Odysseus, and Mussolini. All of these things relate to Libya. For example, Odysseus and Jason and the Argonauts both shipwrecked at Sirte outside Libya, which is also exactly the place where Gaddafi died. And that was Gaddafi's hometown. And then I mentioned the coincidences. Here's another one. On the lower left is Marty Mueller, one of my good friends. In fact, he's my favorite guy there. And then Rudy Mueller on the right is his father. And the coincidence there is, on the very same day that trainee Marty Mueller announced to his father, Rudy, that of all the 65 Peace Corps countries around the world he would be assigned to, Libya, his father, an Air Force B-52 pilot, announced back that exactly on that day, of all the countries he could be assigned to, he was assigned to Wheelus Air Base in Libya. So I thought I'd read you one more story. This is from the chapter called Berbers, Bombs, and Bob Hope. And what I did is I made all the chapters plural to make it fun. And I also tried to use alliteration wherever I could. So you've got that there. There's even more alliteration here because it's about Jim Bowie. So this is takes place in my village in Libya, as I mentioned, 85 miles south of Tripoli, in the Nafusa Mountains, with no running water or electricity. In the middle of an English lesson, I cast my eyes over my class of 36 restless Libyan fifth grade boys. All wore white shawls swathed across their bodies in a variety of configurations. All wore tight-fitting red felt caps. Their faces varied from black to white. Most were swarthy like Arabs, but with a mix of Berber that had accumulated over the centuries. The classroom was adobe. It had no electricity. Open windows with no screens. Instead of a blackboard, a wall painted black. The grayish-brown desks were rough-hewn, two to a student, without drawers. The door was well worn and splintered. It was time to introduce a new English word, the noun knife. To illustrate, I decided to draw a pocket knife from my pants pocket. Me, knife. Class, knife. Me, this is a knife. Class, this is a knife. On to the prepositions. I placed my knife on the table. Where's the knife? The knife is on the table. At this point, I suddenly had a should I or shouldn't I moment. Knife reminded me of a Bowie knife, a very large knife like that in Crocodile Dundee, which in turn reminded me of the Adventures of Jim Bowie show on 1950s television. In the opening credits of the show, the hero cocks his arm and flings a Bowie knife through the air. It's rendered in slow motion with a dramatic helicopter rotor sound. The knife then slams point first perfectly into a tree trunk with a zonk effect, followed by a sproing effect as the knife vibrates in place. I put the knife in my hand. Where's the knife? The knife is in the hand. Do I dare open up the knife and replicate the opening credits of The Adventures of Jim Bowie? There's that ratty old door 15 feet to my left. It wouldn't hurt the door. I put the knife on my head. Where's the knife? The knife is on the head. I was not a knife expert. I was not Jim Bowie. I never even played Mumblety-Peg as a kid. At best, I did a little whittling or used a knife to cut string. If it worked, how great would it be? But if it failed, what a humiliation. I put the knife under the table. Where's the knife? The knife is under the table. What the hell? I opened the knife. In one motion, I cocked my arm and swiveled to the left. Taking dead aim, I released the knife, tumbling through the air. Ka-ching! It penetrated the door. It zonked. It sproinged. Not missing a beat, I said, where's the knife? The students didn't answer. They were slack-jawed in amazement. A little louder, I said, where's the knife? Still frozen. Even louder, I repeated, where's the knife? Then in full-throated unison, they roared out a sentence they had never before uttered. The knife is in the door. Behind my little anecdote above were three giants upon whose shoulders we stood. One, John F. Kennedy, bequeathed upon us the inspiration of the Peace Corps. Two, Noam Chomsky, the father of modern linguistics, bequeathed upon us the principle that all languages can be taught the same way. 3, John Rassias, immersive foreign language pioneer who trained thousands around the world, bequeathed upon us the indefatigable energy, verve, and drama to make classrooms come alive. This book is also unique in having 220 photos, and they're not ordinary photos. I only picked photos, and I had hundreds and hundreds to pick, where mere words cannot convey. On the left is a painting by Norman Rockwell of John F. Kennedy with Ethiopian Peace Corps volunteers. And Norman Rockwell was such a consummate professional, he flew all the way to Ethiopia with his land camera, Polaroid land camera, to take pictures of these guys before doing the picture. That picture was on the cover of Look magazine just 2 weeks before the Libya 1 guys started their training in Princeton in 1966. On the right is a missile shot by the United States during the time of Reagan against Gaddafi's folks. So powerful, no pun intended, shot, but very visual. On the left is that guy, John Rassias, I just spoke about, the most dynamic teacher I've ever seen. He's taught thousands of Peace Corps volunteers. He's out of Dartmouth. And you can just see he was a Zorba-like character, and he inspired us all to be very dramatic and theatrical in the classroom. Another very dramatic guy, this is Mussolini in 1937 in Libya. And of course, at the time, Libya was a colony of Italy. On the left is a Tuareg. These are these warriors that some of you may know about that live in the desert. And it's the men wear the veils and the women do not wear veils. They're very ferocious warriors. On the right's a great picture that you could never invent. Down in the Sahara Desert also, a friend of mine took a picture of his buddies in the desert there on a date palm. On the left is my friend Miled. He lived no running water, no electricity like me, but he was in this little shack, as you can see, with a tin roof. And on the right is me hitchhiking with a camel in the back of a truck. This is one small subset of an amazing mural that's 18 feet long and 10 feet high that was painted by an American GI in Garian, Libya. It's called the Lady of Garian. And it's a pièce de résistance. It's the woman's, it's a naked woman, but the way she's her angled and everything in her body is the map of Syria and Egypt and Libya. And it's got all these miniature shots of GIs and planes and parachutes and people fighting and all this kind of thing. Gaddafi destroyed this thing in 1996, unfortunately. I had a friend in Libya, Jean, that I mentioned before, and this is her very colorful group of 5th grade girls doing at a parade for King Idris's birthday. And there's Jean in a Libyan wedding dress with her roommate. Again, very colorful photograph. This gives you an idea of the kind of space out there in Libya. It's a huge country. It's 2.5 times the size of Texas. I mean, it's a huge country. It's 1,000 miles across, 800 miles up and down, north and south. And very in Yifrin, that town I showed you before at the very beginning of the presentation, they've got a vista like this. So it's very, very inspiring. This is my couscous cover. Again, just an inspiring shot of the craftsmanship. People put this over the couscous bowl and to keep it warm, but very colorful. And it's behind me actually here in the room. This is a shot, an advertisement for the Peace Corps from the Ad Council, and I thought it was just such a terrific thing. I included it in the book. And I've got 2 quick quotes here from former ambassadors who were also former Peace Corps volunteers about my book. Niels Marquardt said, "Randy Hobler's written the best memoir of a Peace Corps experience I've ever read. His amazingly detailed book instantly grips the reader by putting Libya in its properly rich and unique historical perspective." And Nicholas Craw, who was a director of the Peace Corps nationally, said it was a magnum opus, and he goes on and on about it. Susan asked, was there a part that you missed the most after it was all over? And my answer to her is no one part. The totality of immersion in a highly foreign culture with a lasting bonding between villagers and volunteers. So in the book, I've got on the left pictures of all 75 of us guys that went out of Clearfield to Libya, and we all bonded very strongly by the experience. And on the right are a whole series of guys that I knew in my little village. And the guy in the bottom left there is El Hadi, and he was a spy, and he was purposely came to my village to spy on me because they thought I was a CIA spy, but he turned out to be my best friend. So we ended up hanging out and chilling all the time. And that is the end. Again, it's 101 Arabian Tales, How We All Persevered in Peace Corps Libya. It's available on Amazon in paperback and Kindle.
That was super. Thank you, Randy.
Randy.
You reminded me that there is a book of Fulbright mementos called Imported Breads by my friend Philip Sterling, although it's not quite as I don't know what the word is, thorough and extremely broad as yours. It's poems and bits of memoir. But I remember when I read it, I was relieved to find out that everybody had this sort of ambivalent relationship to their host country. Yes, talk about the languages. I'm very interested in knowing how you could learn that in the time they give you.
Oh, I could go on forever, but I'll try to be brief. Arabic is one of the difficult languages in the world. It's got 9 sounds that we don't have in English. And one of them is a constriction of the throat. It took me 6 months to learn, and it's an ain. It's very difficult vocabulary-wise because you can't cheat. An example of that, you can, if you're learning Portuguese or Spanish or a Romance language, you can sort of, borrow and that kind of thing. But the example, I think I've told Susan and Paul about this, is that problem in German and Russian is problème. In French, it's problème. In Portuguese, Spanish, and Italian, it's problema. In Arabic, it's mushkila. And they have these inverted, just like we have child, children, women, woman, and so forth. They're called infixes in English. They have these all over in Arabic, and so sometimes the plurals are not just easy plurals; they're infixes. So the plural of mushkila is mashakal. So it's got the same 3. It's a triliteral version, but the whole Arabic language is based on this triliteral thing. Then the only other language story is in my village, as in many villages, it's a Berber village, and they spoke Berber, and that's a language that's been around for 2,000 years. And I learned a few phrases of it along the way. It's sort of fun.
How long did it take you to get halfway confident in Arabic?
A great question. The Foreign Service has got a scale of 1 to 5, and it goes from elementary. From 1 is elementary conversational, 5 is professional level, MBA lawyer level language. And they wanted to get us to a 2+ before we went over. So we were. So 2+ is like, you can have a conversation and keep things going and do directions and know what food is and things like that. So a bunch of us ended up being 2s or 3s. Some of us went on to study in Cairo and other places and become hyper fluent in Arabic. I've just sort of tried to keep up with various little phrases that I throw at taxi drivers.
Wow.
Does anyone have any other questions for Randy? And that was just fascinating. So I'm sure we're all just still taking it all in. I mean, the richness of your experience just was amazing.
Thank you. Yeah.
I'd love to know more about the culture, and I was intrigued by the lid for the couscous. Can you talk about some of the other crafts or just?
Sure. I tried to find one. I lost it, but I had a wallet, and it was kind of big, but it was very colorful and had all these different colors on it. See, in the background, you can see that couscous cover behind me up on the wall. Yeah, I mean, they have, you could write a whole book on the kinds of things that, the kinds of, crafts that they had and of every kind. I didn't even get into that very much in the book. There's a lot of pictures in the book. There's pictures of all the crafts in the bazaars and that kind of thing. But to give you I remember going to the not Tiananmen Square. I went to Beijing, and I went to the Forbidden City, and I walked up to this place. Maybe some of you guys have been there, and there's this enormous building and very, Chinese looking. And I said, wow, I am so impressed with this big building. And you get these tickets and you walk in, and it turns out that there's like 14 more buildings, like 2 miles long. It just blows you away. And along all the sides of all these exhibitions of Chinese art and culture and language. Well, it's the same kind of thing in Libya, not as extensive as China, but when I was looking into the Berber alphabet, which I have it on another scan here, but they have their own alphabet, and they have their own superstitions, and they have their own marks that they would put on the women's faces, and I have some of those in other presentations, and they have literally 1,000 different kinds of marks that women used to put on their faces, and they're all meaningful things like wealth or gold or good luck, and all it gets so I can't even conceive of it all. So in any one culture, if you want to dive into it, at least Libya has a lot of it.
And it's covered in your book, a lot of it.
A lot of it's in the book, yeah.
We have 2 questions from Leslie. Leslie, let me see if I get this right. How did you learn to write? To Randy?
Arabic.
Yeah.
Arabic, not.
Yeah, learning Arabic. I don't know about Hebrew, because I know Hebrew goes right to left also, but there's only 29 letters. You only have to learn 29 things, and there's a couple of rules about how you connect them. The other thing is, unlike English, which has all these phonemes that are all over the place, English has got 46 sounds and 26 letters, okay? I've studied linguistics. So that is really confusing. But in Italian and in Arabic, every letter has got one sound. There's a 1-for-1 correspondence. So that makes it simple in terms of the writing of it. But to learn 29 things is easy, relatively speaking, compared to, to be a decent three level in Arabic, you got to know 3,000 words. So that's the difference.
Better than Chinese, at least.
Oh yeah, Chinese is crazy, yeah.
You were a language major, correct? French?
I majored in French and minored in Spanish, yeah.
All right. And then another question from Leslie. What kind of government did Libya have when you were there before Gaddafi?
When we were there, it was a kingdom. And there was a guy, King Idris, who was the king. He was about 89 years old when we were there. And he came out of the kind of a religious sect from the eastern part of Libya. Originally, his family was from Algeria, and then he became this sect. And he was in eastern Libya, where some of the caravans went through. So he was in this area where he had a lot of power. His family had a lot of power. And there's a funny story I can tell you about the revolution that's in the book. But this guy was 89 years old, so he knew he wouldn't be around for a while. He had no sons or daughters. All he had was a nephew. He hated his nephew. Everybody hated, the country hated his nephew. We even hated him. We didn't really know him that well, but we hated him. So he decided he was going to do a fake coup d'etat on the 2nd of September, 1969, and instate somebody of his own choosing. So there were about 4 people, Gaddafi, the Black Prince, all these other people, who behind the scenes were, not surprisingly, waiting for this old guy to die so they could take over. And they were all planning on taking over. But Gaddafi was smart enough to get wind of this plan for September 2nd. And Gaddafi said, I know, what I'll do is I'll make this happen on September 1st. I'll just go the day before. So on September 1st, the revolution is launched. and there was nobody fighting, and there was no bloody things happening, and nobody could understand why not. And it turns out that all the king's people said, oh, they moved the revolution up a half day. So when we're going to, attach take over the radio station, take over the post office, take over this and that, I guess they just moved it up. So it was a bloodless revolution.
This is a question raised by Lisa, and it was something you and I talked about. What was the catalyst or catalysts for your joining the Peace Corps?
I had been very inspired, as maybe a lot of you guys were, number one, by Kennedy and his famous speech at the University of Michigan about, just rallying everybody to this idea of the Peace Corps. At the time, you guys may remember Tom Dooley and Albert Schweitzer were out in doing their work in Africa and in Southeast Asia. That was very inspiring to me. I wanted to serve in some way. I wanted to do something other than the military, not because I was against the military to begin with, but I wanted to do something before I became, ground up and wound up into a family and a career and all that kind of thing. And I knew if I didn't do it then, I'd never get there. So I decided I'd do it then. And I love languages, and I love travel, and I love cultures and all that kind of stuff. So you roll all that stuff together. And so there were a lot of us that had traveled a lot before going.
I have a question about the Tuaregs. When I was in Senegal, I met a Tuareg guy who was teaching young boys to do silversmithing.
Wow.
And I wondered, do they wear a lot of jewelry in that tradition? I actually have a piece that he made or his kids made.
I don't know. That's a great question. But the Tuaregs are known as the blue people because they wear these blue outfits, and their skin gets all colored blue because of it.
Huh. I don't remember that about him, but I remember. I don't think he was wearing a mask when I met him, but he was kind of on a porch next to one of the markets.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. Well, once you're out of Libya, they changed a lot, what they wear and that kind of thing. But I do have a story from when I was in Saudi Arabia about Tuaregs. I met this German businessman who had a place in Nigeria. And he went someplace in Europe to go on a business trip, and he had been burgled a number of times, and so he hired a Tuareg to guard his house. He came back 2 weeks later, and on his front lawn there was a dead man, a decapitated dead man, and he said, "What is this?" And he said, "Well, this guy tried to, burgle your house, so I killed him." Well, why did you leave him here? Oh, I'm making an example for anybody, never to come to your house again.
Wow.
Wow.
Really a warrior, huh?
Oh yeah, they're very fierce warriors.
I have a question. One of the things that struck me about your book was how you described some of the food, and in some ways it was, I don't know if it's since, but at that time it was some of the most delicious food you'd ever had. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, they taught me how to make this. I'd never heard of this thing before. I'd never heard of couscous. And they had it, every day almost in my village. And I go to some detail. It's my favorite food. And it's hard to describe in 30 seconds, but the basic idea is that they have this olive oil in the bottom, and they put they what's it called? Saute the onions in it. And then they have this tomato sauce, and then they put in chickpeas, and then they put in meat, and they let it boil for 2 hours or 3 hours, and the meat gets very soft. And it's got, and it's cooked at a couscousier, which is a 2-step process where the stuff is boiling down here. And at the top, they have these holes, and they put the couscous at the top, and so they steam the couscous at the top. And it's also very hot, relatively hot. So they have harissa and cayenne and stuff in it, lots of delicious spices. And when you roll all that stuff together, they have all these different textures, all these different flavors. It's just delicious.
Wow.
And
it's much more delicious than Moroccan couscous. If you get Moroccan couscous in a restaurant, there's no comparison. The Libyan country couscous is like 10 times better.
Have you ever had it in America?
Couscous?
The Libyan type of couscous?
No, because there's only one Libyan restaurant of all America. It's in Atlanta someplace. So
Wow.
Now we're all going to head to Atlanta.
Road trip.
Oh, yes. Okay. This is another thing that from the book that you mentioned. Joan had a question about the, do they have a Libyan bread or is the staple rice? You talked about.
oh yeah, they had a Libyan bread that they cooked in Yifrin, that village I told you about. They had a bakery there, and it's like a dauphin, right? A French dauphin size. So it's about this big, and it's crusty, just like a French bread, and it's delicious. If you just eat it out of the oven, just fabulous. Doesn't need any butter or anything to it. And I once ate a whole a whole loaf of it.
But the staple is couscous rather than rice, isn't it?
Well, I thought, that's a great question. And I have this in the book. I thought that the three things that they ate in my village was just standard for all of Libya. But when I started talking to 101 people, there were 101 different kinds of things. There were certain things in common like couscous, but all kinds of other things that people ate. One guy who was in the Sahara Desert, the whole year that we were there, all he ate was pasta with red sauce. That's all he ate. He lost a lot of weight, believe it or not. In my village, they had three things. They had couscous. They had a thing called bazin, which is boiled barley, and they put it up like a big. They boil it up in a big. It looks like a volcano. In the top of the volcano, they put hot sauce. Then you're supposed to take it with your fingers and roll it up into a little ball, dip it into the sauce, and then you're supposed to swallow it whole. And I would chew it because it tasted so good. They said, "You can't do that, Mr. Randy. You must swallow it whole." No, I'm just going to do this. And the other thing they ate was the same sauce, but with spaghetti. And they put it in a big bowl, and they'd eat it with their fingers. And they just go like this. They were so expert at spinning the thing around, and they go like this and eat it with their hands.
Couscous is basically a very small pasta kind of thing, isn't it?
It's a grain. It's a semolina grain.
So it is like wheat. It is a wheat.
Yeah, it's a wheat. Yeah.
You didn't do that eating when you were cleaning your contact lenses, right? Because I still remember the story about you putting your contact lenses.
Oh yeah. Can I tell you that story? Oh sure.
Yeah, I think you did about I can't remember.
No, I'll tell everybody else. I wore contact lenses at the time, and I'm sitting in this little villa in this little, shop, and no running water, no electricity, dirt floor, and you just sit around and you drink tea and you talk, and it's very dusty in that country, of course, and when you get dust in your eye, sometimes you have to take that out and you put it in your mouth and you put it back in your eye. So I did that. Put my contact lens back in my eye, and they were all looking at me, saying, what's that? And I said, okay. In the United States, we've got this thing, little pieces of plastic. It's sort of like eyeglasses, but it's very small. We put it in your eye, take it out, put it in. Wow, that's great, But half an hour later, this guy Muhammad comes in the shop, and they say, "Hey, I'm Muhammad. Guess what? What? Mr. Randi. He has these little pieces of glass. He puts them in his head. He puts them in his eyes. He takes them out, puts them in." And Muhammad says, "No way." "Yeah, he does. He takes them in. He takes it out." "No way." And they say, "Do you want to bet?" And they bet him 30 pounds, which was a month's salary. And they said, "Mr. Randi." So I took it out. I put this thing on my palm and showed him it.
Did you get a cut?
I didn't get a cut of it, no.
No, actually, when I was in Senegal, I got an abrasion from the dust getting under my contact lens.
Absolutely, yeah. That can be nasty, yeah.
I wanted to ask you how they prepared the women for being in that kind of a culture.
Well, they warned everybody, but there's a whole thing in the book about the decisions, should we go to Libya or not? And then they did warn them about everything, about dressing quite, with down to your wrists and your ankles and covering your head, and not covering your face, but covering your head. And they warned us about a lot of these things ahead of time. And some of the people from the Libya 66, 68 group came and trained us in Bisbee and other places about this. Probably as well as they could have. So they were steeled to know that it might be bad. Now, it seems from the book, the chapter I gave you, I mean, they still had very compelling, and about 90% of the women still were so glad they went to Libya and had these experiences, despite all the other things that happened. Only a very small group, had particularly bad situations.
Wow.
Generally, as a group of Americans coming into Libya, how were you received? Men, women, I mean, the whole group of you.
Oh, I should point out that something I was totally unaware of was the hospitality, which is ingrained in these Arabs, Libyans being just simply one of them. I don't know if you guys have read T.E. Lawrence, but he talks about this law of the desert. And if you're out there in your tent, your Bedouin tent someplace, and some stranger comes in and all you have is a handful of rice, you're required to give that handful of rice to that person. And that was the first 3 weeks I was there. They had me over. I didn't need any place else except in other people's houses. They were hugely hospitable people, genuinely hospitable, incredibly friendly, and it was surprising for us to realize that.
Randy, thank you so much. I think we could go on and on forever, but
We could, yeah.
We're getting close to 6:30. I mean, maybe we can have you back for Randy part 2.
So you know what? Everybody read the book, and then
We'll read the book, and then
Right.
that will spark so many other questions, I'm sure. So, Susan, thank you for being a fabulous dynamic Uno.
Thank you. All right, thank you.
And again, Randy, thank you for sharing your experience and the depth of your research is just fascinating. And
that's great.
So thank you for sharing that. And yeah, I can't wait to dig into the book and
I think you're going to sell some books, Randy.
Okay.
So,
Thank you.
So just briefly, we have a few more things just before we end. And I just want to talk about our June event, which is June 8th. And that event is an offering called Que Sera, Sera. And the title of this gently confronting and evocative storytelling performance says it all. It's a life's journey of sexual orientation and gender expression told by the charming and engaging Zelda, AKA Judith Z. Miller, who opens her heart and her life to the audience. And Zelda reads her colorful life story, imbuing her memories with passion, joy, and melancholy. Her stories are quirky and funny, distressing and sad, excitable and intermittently suicidal and tragic. Que Sera, Sera is truly an epic tale of a coming of age in one's sexuality and gender identity. So I hope you can all join us on June 8th for that presentation. And I would like to just turn it back over to Leslie for closing comments.
Thank you, Kristen and Susan, and also of course, to Randy. Thank you for such an interesting, engaging tales from Libya. It makes me regret that my application was rejected all those many years ago. But anyway, thank you for coming and regaling us, and thank you everyone for attending. And to all the members, please be sure to add your bio and a headshot in the profile, and other members can find you. And don't forget to support our business partners. Until next time, please know that we are here for you. And don't forget, we will meet again in person soon, possibly in July. So keep abreast with our newsletters, and thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you all. It was lovely.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone.